Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, this is the second video talking about my theory, just my experience, sort of the phenomenological approach to cluster B. And I guess I could say, honestly, I mean, I've come to find a theory. It's something that's worked for me. Um, Phenomenological theory of cluster B disorders. Okay, so I was just kind of relating in the last video how the what Heidegger calls the Dasein, and maybe it's not exactly the same, but it's inspired by that. The idea of having a connection with being itself is sort of like a place, a place that we can sort of bring out more expression, where we can bring out more expression in ourselves, or sort of pay more attention to it, to that part of us that's just sort of related just to being itself. And that might be maybe even more effective than just meditation, as a way of sort of creating space to sort of open up the personality, where the more emotional reactive parts of us now have kind of a contrast and an opening, where there's hopefully room to have more meaningful deliberations and reflection. um, anyway, that's the idea. Now, that immediately becomes complicated because depending on the person, everybody's different. Um, I think we actually have inherited over the thousands of years, or hundreds of thousands of years. I think we've inherited a lot of, I would say, the components of our psychology really are kind of like almost like elements of, like, I would say almost like elements of what I would call witchcraft. And when I say witchcraft, I'm nothing supernatural. I just mean that I really think that a lot of our natural processes are actually sort of like craft elements. And what I mean by that is that I think we're very psychological. Humans are extremely psychological, and I don't think we appreciate that the kind of you might say the kind of the phases of our attitudes and our way of seeing the world, our perspective, is filled with a lot of mechanism in the mind that sort of allows us, for example, we can sort of like distance ourselves mentally from things. We can sort of dissociate from things. We can sort of see things as lesser or as larger. These are all sort of perspective mechanisms that when we're not in control, we're just sort of at the mercy. People with borderline personality disorder sometimes complain of feeling a sense of derealization or depersonalization. you know. And when these things just happen, we're sort of like, God, what is that? We think it's something wrong. These are really mechanisms that actually they're actually like powers, if you want to say. They're sort of like mental powers, because there are some situations where we want to be a little bit distanced, where it actually helps us, as far as coping. But these, and if they're more intentional, or if we have more, I don't know, more skill with these things, it could almost be like a type of mindcraft. I would say witchcraft, just because I think witchcraft really is that, really is just mental powers. And I don't think there's any taboo about it. I just think that's our minds are designed, and they have components that are kind of, very powerful. So I think that we already have, before even getting into all this stuff about meditation, or when I say, and I want to say meditation, I want to say the sense of being. That's how I look at it. But before we get into all that, we're just full of all kinds of powers, and the powers a lot of times just drag us around. Um, I can have the lensing of my mind in a certain mode. I can sort of see people as beneath me, or in another lensing of my own mind, I can see people as above me, like intimidating, or I can see things as far away, meaning psychologically, meaning, I sort of put things away from my mind, so I'm not bothered by them, or things can get really close and really intimidating. Um, and there's just all kinds of things we can do. Now, one of these craft elements in our mind that I think is very powerful is the aversion to being weak, the aversion to self-questioning, because you start to self-question, and that's like a doubt. And there are parts of us that are just built-in instinct to avoid doubt and to avoid hesitation. This is something we've inherited. We've inherited this not from growing up in a dysfunctional family. This is actually an inheritance that's actually in the brain, inherited from, I think, thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I mean, these are inherited legacy, inherited characteristics. Okay, so um, this is why I personally am not a big fan of focusing too much on the family story. I think the family story can bring out things in us, but the actual existence of these components, this existed in us for thousands of years. I mean, we inherit this. Okay, so yes, our family experience can kind of bring out these things, maybe bring them out in how we emphasize them, but these things are already a part of us. So among these craft elements, I think is a natural element that can be very highly expressed in some people, especially if some people have the phenotype of being very dominant. The more dominant a person really is, the more they can't have a lot of hesitation, weakness, self-questioning. Let's say kind of the neurotic sort of profile that would be very underexpressed. Okay, so it'd be a lot of direct confidence, non-questioning, and that's just kind of the it's sort of like the expression of power. You know what I mean? So when we talk about what I was talking about, this phenomenological exercise of sort of opening up space, opening up space. Well, the thing is, the human being doesn't really open up space unless it's really in a very secure and very non-threatening environment. The flower opens when it's, in our case, it opens when everything's peaceful. But in many situations, we want to tighten it up and sort of make a fist, and we want to be more like a fist and not like an open hand. You know what I mean? And so I think that if what I described with the again, I was almost going to say meditation, but the awareness of being, I'm going to say awareness of being. Okay, that really starts to get into the open hand. That's kind of like the flower opening, sort of unfolding the parts of the self. Now, we can really argue that there's a part of us that instinctively wants to close down and make a fist and be hard, okay? Because there's a time for the open hand and there's a time for the closed fist, the power, more power position, okay? So now I'm aware of that, and I think it is a problem because we have to deal with it. But I think what we can see with the cluster B is that when they go fist, when they go closed, okay, tight, power, whatever, it is so fused down and it's so tight that I really think that the people with the cluster B, I think we can get so collapsed down into our primitive. I wouldn't say the primitive self. And when I say the primitive self, I'm not talking about the baby or the infant. I'm talking about the thousands and thousands of years of inheritance of our natural mindcraft, witchcraft elements, which are very, we have a whole library, a whole library of craft elements in our brain, and so we're not regressing to childhood really. I mean, we can say that, but what we're just sort of the beast in us is very very expressed, and I don't know if I want to say maybe the cluster B represents people that are we're sort of the tail. We're sort of showing our tail of evolutionary, the what's maybe been bygone and evolutionary. We're sort of kind of showing a little bit of our pre-civilized, whatever. Or maybe it's just that we're underexpressing something very human, which is the space. Okay. Now I talked in the last time about coming up with like an artificial way to sort of bring out more space. Okay. But I think most people have a little bit of space naturally without having to think about it, without having to use an exercise. And that even when they get powerful, okay, they still have a little bit of room for deliberation and a little bit of natural space. In the case of the cluster B, for whatever reason, it's just tighter and it's more collapsed, and the space is kind of gone, and that's you know, I don't know what to say. I mean, I'd say philosophically, if the open hand that I've talked about is like an analogy to maybe Heidegger's ideal of phenomenology, then maybe the closed down cluster B collapsing is maybe more like other philosophers. I'm trying to think of one. I can't think of the name right now, but like I think I remember some French philosophers that were into like the philosophy of immanence. They call it immanence, like tight. They call it materialism, which is kind of interesting. You know how you have to have a real intuition to think that materialism is really the loss of space. That's pretty interesting, you know, because I mean, I guess if you could think of like materialism as the opposite of spirituality, I guess by intuition, you know, the more spiritual position would be the more spacious, the more open, you know, whatever. So it's interesting how this ties into our kind of our traditions of philosophy and even religion. Um, but you know, call it the materialistic, call it the collapsed, the immanent, and I think the philosopher to look at from France, I think his name was Bataille, just you know whatever. But the bottom line is that you see these contrasts, and I really think that this causes a problem because I think our Minecraft elements are almost designed at times, especially in the more dominant, aggressive, to really almost kind of not like the opening. You know, really, it's almost designed to be anti-opening. Okay, so we have to be prepared that there may be a whole cluster of Minecraft elements in our brain that would even be hostile, even kind of sneering, jeering, sort of making fun of the idea of opening up, because that would be really against all instincts, because that would be self-questioning, that would be you know, kind of pausing, everything contrary to dominance, you know. So I think we have to be very respectful that you know, for a lot of people it will be so counterintuitive and so against the real expressed instincts of their Minecraft elements that you know, I can't say that what I'm talking about would be helpful for everybody that has cluster B. Okay, so right there, the theory is has a big asterisk, and there may be a lot of cluster B people that are just either going to say you're just full of shit, or that's just crazy, or they're going to be like pretending to understand, but they're really not designed to understand. Or the other thing is that I do think that with pure factor one psychopathy, I think there is a pseudo space where the factor one psychopathy people will talk about how they're living in sort of like a space where they really don't have a lot of judgment, and that, you know, they don't really feel anything, and it's sort of like indifference, and that's kind of similar to the place of being, where being has no interest. Okay, and so you could say, well, maybe what's the difference between having that space of being and then the space of the factor one psychopath, where it's just like no feelings, no attachment. And I think that that may be a part of us. You know how we talk about gold and fool's gold. You know, there may be some Minecraft elements that are the pseudo version of the actual meditative space, so that they look like space, they operate like space, they even give space, but there's something about it that would be the fool's gold and not the gold. You know, and we have to kind of think about what's the difference between a factor one psychopath and someone who has real space for deliberation, because they really could be so similar that I think even a lot of psychopaths would consider themselves to be very kind of like philosophical, or very remote, or very you know, I don't know, kind of like having the benefits of space, when I'm not sure if it's really space. And I think maybe one of the telling signs that you see in the factor one psychopathy is that it's maybe more alienation than space. Okay, because I think it is kind of an alienation and sort of a kind of a dissociation from feelings. Okay, so sort of a dissociation from our humanity. You know, you might want to say, not really a true space. A space is just room to deliberate. It's not a disavowal or a disconnection. Okay, so I think we have to be really careful to understand that just the idea of proposing a method for creating space, we have to understand that a lot of natural resistances are going to come up to either distort it or simulate it, or just disregard it or oppose it or just be resistant. Okay, so we have to understand that we're designed in our Minecraft elements um, not to be really suitable. So just talking about what I'm talking about, it's not as easy as it sounds. Okay, it may sound easy, but I think for a lot of people, it's probably not. So in the next video, I'll try to talk more about that. Okay, thanks for watching.